Okay, so today I want to go through uh, some data that I found where it has a few matches, but the data is incredibly comprehensive. It's got multiple different sets of data just for a single game, and these include dynamic events, which I can load up here for a single game, which we can see is very. Uh, there's a ton of data in here, and just from the looking at it, there are a ton of different columns that can have information in it, which is awesome as far as uh, I'm concerned in exploring data. Um, you even have some sort of metadata about the match, some different frame information for per player, I believe, and then we have different phases of play as well. So that's really interesting way to capture data. I've not actually seen that before. Um, So you can even break a game down phases of play and then tracking data, which is what I'm kind of interested in today, mainly because most data sources that I get don't really have tracking data as accessible without paying tens of thousands of dollars. And this is free and this is cool. So I think my brain, first of all, wants to go ahead and do a project with the tracking data. But I do want to take a look at the other data as well. I think there are things in here that we can actually connect these data sources. So, like back to the phases of play, there are probably phases within the dynamic data. So, for a particular phase, we might get a whole bunch of different events for that phase. And you can link the data together in that way. And that'll be something for a future project. But the tracking data, like I said, I think we can just use alone and come up with a good project, but also like have a way to explore data. And I'm just gonna take you through this and be honest and show you what the actual process looks like because a lot of videos on the internet are gonna show you, like some curated final product. And that's not actually what we do in our data exploration step. Um, in most cases, you're going to just receive data and you might have some information about it. I've worked at a bunch of different companies, and most companies say they care about documentation and order, but they're not really going to give you a whole bunch of documentation uh, and information on the data. It's really going to be you, especially as a new person, figuring things out. And so there's just a process. There's no set process, but I'm going to take you through just what it looks like to start exploring the data and then come up with a project and get a picture. Um, yeah, so it does look like there is likeliness that we could even link this with other player ID. Um, yeah, is there a frame associated with that? I'm not sure, but we could probably link this data. Oh yeah, we got timestamps, so we could probably link this data with the other things, but we might end up just working just with the tracking data because that's enough to come up with tons of cool projects. But yeah, so let's go ahead and read in our data. And if you're not familiar with Jupyter Notebook, it is a really uh, great tool to start exploring data. It's getting more complex. There's all kinds of different things that you can do, like scheduling, um, and you can actually create pipelines with that scheduling. But I can go through this Jupyter Notebook and a deeper level for another project at some other time. If the comments, so comment below if you really want to see that happen. And I can sort of show you how Jupyter Notebook works, but essentially just modularizes our code so we can execute one or two things at a time and keep it in memory, which is really interesting and really helpful. Um, yeah, so like I said, I've already got the read in here, and we're probably going to work with the tracking data, but I do want to take a look at this dynamic data just to see what it looks like because it is really cool. If you're working with StatsBomb, you've got a certain setup, and this data looks like a completely different setup, so it's something new to me. And one of the first things I do is just sort of literally just print out a snippet of it. Okay, yeah, so one of the first things I noticed with this data, we have an event ID, so this is usually we can use an event ID with this kind of data. There's going to be associated things with an event ID. So if you can imagine um, you're dribbling the ball, but then someone comes up to try to take that ball away from you, that's going to be most likely a separate event. Um, and, but they're sort of the same, they're going to be related in some way. And so an event ID is really helpful, not just to find a specific event, but just to find how it relates to another one. And I can already look right here. This is going to be when we're looking at soccer data or sports data just in general. You're going to have an event type. So this is a really great descriptor of what's happening. And even like what I just said right there. So player possession, probably going to have some kind of subtype or something where it's a player possession could be a lot of different things, right? It could be a dribble. You could just be standing there. Who knows? Maybe they even count throw in as a player possession. And then you have off the ball run, off the ball engagement, which might even link to this off ball engagement. Let's see. So, oh, look, a passing option, a player possession, and a passing option. So, most likely, this passing option links to a player possession. So, finding your sort of important event IDs, and usually underscore ID or ID is a really common way to present that information. As sort of, you always take note of these IDs. Okay, IDs are usually going to be links to other things. So if we think in databases, like primary IDs and stuff like that, and other IDs that create your one-to-many. I imagine. Let's see. So player possession, and then you have a passing option. I'm guessing these two passing options right next to each other have two different player IDs. Yep, Nata and Grosas. I imagine this player possession right here, and these are two passing options just because it looks like these are ordered. Yeah, we're going up in time, right? Up in time right here. So player possession followed by two passing options. This is going to be a one-to-many. So one player is going to have multiple passing options, or can have multiple passing options. So these IDs, I'm going to imagine that this is like a foreign key. This can be used as a foreign key somewhere. And the reality is that there are so many columns. This is a really great way to sort of get an idea. Okay, look, we got, you know, let's see, we've got, numbers, we've got, let's see, location numbers, we've got true booleans, it's probably text of some sort. Okay, associated player possession event ID, 8-1. All right, so this row right here, 8-1. I believe that was the guy right before. Player possession, awesome, and let's go back to our associated event ID. Yeah, I did highlight it. Great. 8-1. So, yep, this and he was a passing option, and this is our ID for the player that had possession. So this app, even we look below 8-1 for all of these. These are all probably passing options for 8-1, which was our second row right here. Yep. So that's how we're going to actually link these events together. Oh, okay. So this is cool too. When you're looking in soccer data, especially, anything starting with an X is, if you've heard about XG, so your expected goals, these are typically going to uh, be probabilities of something. So expected value in statistics is basically the probability that something will happen. And it's been applied, and we've heard ad nauseum probably at this point what XG is, but there are a lot of other X values that we don't really talk about, but the professionals behind the scenes absolutely use. And this is really cool because as a person who sits here and thinks about how can we calculate X threat, you know what? That's an interesting one. Why don't we look that up? And X threat is becoming, yeah, awesome. So this data source even has X threat. X threat is becoming really a new thing. So I mean, like the threat that whatever the play is has towards scoring. So not just like if somebody takes a shot, but like if you connect a pass, what is the likeliness that if you complete that pass to that person, that that is going to turn into a goal scoring opportunity? So it's not just like how likely you are to score a goal, but like who are creating it. So this is really good for people like who do you want to think about, like Martin Odegaard or Ozil, like those guys that were really just brilliant passers of the ball, through balls and breaking lines and stuff like that. And like how dangerous is their work towards creating goals, like their creativity, and Lionel Messi being like the ultimate example. But it looks like this actually collects your X threat. Player targeted X threat. So yeah, this is probably a passing option. Um, or this is a possession, and then like your passing option, if you target that player, what is the likeliness that if you connect that pass they're going to be threatening on goal? Very low right here. Start of the game, it makes sense, right? We usually see people pass it backwards. How threatening it is kicking your ball back to your own goalie probably is the least amount of threatening pass you can make, right? Which makes sense. Okay, so um, now that we've got um, the player data, we basically just got just this column um, in its own data frame, right? So just one row for each of these. But what I really need to do is flatten out this data and then stick it into its own data frame, because what it has is basically we can see this as here's a column, here's a column, here's a column, column, and then a new row, right? And we can do that for each player. So there'll be a row for each player on each for each basically for each frame, each player for each frame. So we're gonna have whatever. Let's just say that there's 5,000 tracking events times 22 players. So we're going to create this large data frame, but then we're going to be able to work with this data a little bit easier. And I think what I want to do in my head just is get maybe an average position of each player on the field during this game, just so I can sort of maybe see, you know, what the shape of this game looked like. Was it played on the left side of the field? What was the general formation of the game? General formations and such. What we want to do is we want to take this player, and every time they're mentioned, we just want to average these x and y values together. So we get his average position in the game. And then we can just really easily graph that. One of the things I'm actually realizing right now is I don't know what team these players belong to. So if I go ahead and plot this, I'm going to get a lot of points on there. It's going to show us the general locations of all the players on the field, but I'm not really going to know what team they were part of. So that is something I'm going to have to figure out how to do. And I'm probably going to have to go up to this data source that we were looking at the beginning and figure out how to get a specific team so that we can at least change the color or something. And you know what? Control F is always your best friend. Team ID. And then, fantastic. So we got player ID right here, and they're going to have their team ID associated with as well. I don't actually have to know what team it is, whether it's Newcastle or Auckland, maybe, I want to say. I just need to know they're on different teams. So I can create a data frame with just a team ID and player ID. And we can get each unique player ID and associate it with the team ID. And then we can use that to actually color our plot. So I'm going to come down here and add a few more cells. So now we can do a map plot PLT, and then we will have an actual team ID associated with it, and we can use that to determine the color of the player. All right, so we have our final image here. Um, yeah, interesting. So let's just try to make some sense of this. Let's go ahead and look at our values. A few of our players were very far on the X value. 2, 3. Yeah, so I'm going to assume that this is the goalie, maybe, for the blue team, because we don't have any red positions way far over here on the right. So it makes sense that this was the goalie for the red team. So goalie here, goalie here. Is this a striker? It's an interesting set of positions, but it does look like maybe. Wow, the game was really played very much in the center, but maybe on this, you can call that, I guess, right side of the field, or maybe left side of the field if you're going from left to right. Left side of the field is really played over here, it seems like. It'd be interesting to actually get the ball in here and see where the ball was at, because if the ball was really over here a lot, it does feel like the red team was pulled to this side of the field. They kept a pretty straight line right here, which, to be honest, to me, and knowing a little bit about soccer, I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a defensive position. This is where having the video will really going to help, or creating even more graphs like this and checking out the data a little bit more, exploring it a little bit more, which we'll do. I think what we'll do for our next video is to actually just pick something else in this game and get a better look at it, and then eventually we'll have a bunch of different graphs and a bunch of different data readouts, and we can sort of maybe interpret the game. And then what we might be want to do is actually go back and look at the metadata in the match and see who won. Just look at the general information about it and see if our assertions are correct. I would say, wow, so blue team seems much more vertical. Um, like maybe they got up and down the field a lot more, which, you know, would indicate to me maybe they were the more offensive term. And the red team seems much more pulled wide. These two players over here are really working together, so creating width maybe, but um, maybe this is like a defensive posture. Maybe that's my first guess. So I'm gonna actually write this, my initial thoughts on what I think is going on here.